Welcome everybody back here on Segal Talks at the Martin Segal Theater Center, the Graduate Center, CUNY in Manhattan, in New York City, at the City University. And it's another day on planet Earth, another day with the COVID virus, another day where the world is wondering what will be happening, what is happening. We don't have all the full informations. All we know that yesterday, Wednesday, there were 39,000 new infections in the United States, the highest ever recorded since the pandemic started. The European Union are thinking for next week, Wednesday, to loosen travel restrictions, and it looks like the United States will not be able to send its citizens to Europe. Americans will be barred, most probably. It's a shocking development. It joins Brazil and Russia. Very early on, I think Trump overnight decided, without talking to anybody, that Europeans shouldn't come in when America had very little, 1,000 infections, and I think whatever, 50 people who died from it, and Europeans were very unhappy about this. Now Europe seems to have done very, very well. Meanwhile, in America, over 2 million infections, the hotspot of the world, disastrous handling of the situation. A president that refuses to wear a mask, tells people they should inject disinfectant, flees in a bunker when there seems to be a problem, has police clear with tear gas peaceful protesters to make a photo op with a Bible. And he threatened and did use military against the American people. It's unprecedented. It's shocking, using military tactics from Iraq war with helicopters flying over protesters, and the outrage we have all share about the death of George Floyd. Of course, intensified everything that's so wrong in this country and what needs to be changed. And we all hope that theater is a part of it. Artists have been on the right side of the struggle, the complex struggle for freedom and liberties. They've been the right side of history. And they always are able to experience the present, the moment better, and often anticipate the future, as Rancière say. That's what artists do. And sometimes when traditional arts, great arts like theater, come together with new technology, innovation happens. This has been the history of the arts. When film came up, when Louis Fuller, the dancer, invented new lighting systems for her dancers, she held 45 patents in 1890. And now we have Zoom, we have Twitter, we have Instagram, TikTok, and digital revolution that goes so much faster than the revolution on Bertolt Brecht's time. And all of a sudden, airplanes, cars, radios, film cameras, projections came up and completely changed how we experience the world, and perhaps what we experience now. And the velocity of it is much deeper, but we are so close. We can see it, and this virus now exposes everything, the structures, like an X-ray. We see what's wrong, as Shatner said. It's a Fukushima type disaster, but the roof is open. We look on it with horror. And we now know we have to change something. We have to change ourselves. We need to authentically create a change if we want to see the change, but we also all have to work to get out and do and take actions. We have been talking now for 13 weeks with theater artists from around the world. We are the only US and most probably also in Europe institution that does programming every day, and new programming as a theater institution related to the coronavirus, talking to artists. We most probably the only profession, theater and performance, that now has an overview for 3 months about what's happening globally, how this virus affects our lives. It's documenting and archiving the present, and normally others choose what's being archived or not. We said no, we are important. We make a great contribution, and we talk to so many people, whether it's South Africa and Hong Kong and Tunisia, Cuba, how theater artists have been always part of change and highlighted in a symbolic way, an imaginative way, but also in a real way. This week we focus a little bit on a part of the world that often is not talked about enough. It is the Caribbean. We have Spanish-speaking Caribbeans that we did a festival last year. It the Segal Center with the help of the French Cultural Services and the great Stéphanie Bérard, who put it together. We are also publishing a book, and Daniele was on with us from Martinique. Daniele Francesca was with us on Tuesday, a fantastic look into her world and what she is thinking. And Paul was the one who directed her work. Paul Pryce was so generous. Say, of course I come and help you guys out and direct her play, The She-Devil. Next week we will have actually two Jamaican theater artists from the Caribbean, English speaking, and Paul was the one who came and talked a lot also about his work, about how it is, what it is to be someone from Trinidad, Tobago, to be living in Brooklyn, to be an actor, a filmmaker. He teaches acting. Actually, as a colleague from me in Brooklyn College, I'm at City University and also at HB Studio. He has his MFA in acting from Yale Drama, and he's a successful filmmaker who developed at Sundance Lab his film The Deliverer, which won awards. And also he was at Marvel's Jessica Jones on Netflix. Well, this is quite something. And so we're going to hear a bit now from Paul. Paul, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Where are you at the moment, and how is life with Corona for you?
Well, I'm holed up in my apartment in Brooklyn, in Park Slope, and I've been here for, like everybody else in New York for like up to 3 months. I mean, now we're only just starting to emerge out of our hovels and going out into the streets and engaging with the world again. But it's been quite a few months in 2020, and it's at least certainly for me, it's been a time of deep reflection. I think even before the assassination of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, before that happened, just that incubation period of being in holed up in our apartments was really I think it was a moment to reflect and to kind of reassess exactly. Certainly for me, like what am I doing? What am I saying? What is it? What's my philosophy on the work, and where do I want my work to go? I think and then compounded with this next pandemic, so to speak. We're sort of in a double pandemic, as it's been called now. I think the confluence of those two things, certainly for me, has really forced me to really re-examine everything that I thought I knew, and exactly what is it my work really stands for. I think sometimes when you're in this business, the entertainment business, you could get into certain tracks, right? And New York has this particular energy that you just are driven by the energy of the city and the demands of so many people as an actor and director, and you're trying to get to the next level and advance your career. But then the reason why for what you do often or can get lost in the mix. And I think what the coronavirus has done, and of course what the Black Lives Matter protest has ignited, is the sense of realignment and an interrogation as to what are we really doing, and what do we really want to say with our work, certainly as theater artists, as filmmakers. And I think for me that has really caused me to really reflect and to rethink everything that I thought I knew. And you're kind of going through your education, your work, and then you start to question even your own prejudices, your own biases, your own inclinations, and then now it's questioning why do I feel this way? Why am I doing this as opposed to that? And for me, that's kind of been what these last few months have done. And I think I was listening to Jonathan McQuarrie in one of your other Segal talks, and he said a really, really fascinating thing about the breath, and I totally agree with that. It's really, what is the spiritual alignment? Spiritually, what are you contributing to the world that's really moving moving the needle in the necessary direction. And I think that's going to impact positively everybody else, rather than just kind of going with the flow. So that's kind of where my head is at, and where I've been thinking about. You know, yeah, and I mean, as we talked a little bit earlier, it's this. We're in this moment where I'm part of this National Alliance for Acting Teachers, and it's this amazing forum of some of the leaders in the profession, the theater profession, and we've been having these talks and these salons discussing the curriculum of what are we teaching as teachers, as acting teachers to the incoming classes, and I think the students are demanding from us as professors more of their teachers and of their faculty, and I think it's incumbent on us to really question again our curriculum, our sources, and challenging certainly some of the older teachers and the older heads, right? Of what do we teach, and how do we teach those things? And that has been a really interesting conversation to be a part of, because it's really it's triggering, right? It's triggering as to, because we teach. I think teachers teach from what they've been taught and how they've been taught, and it's passed down, right? Teaching is in many ways it's a craft. It's you know, a craft that's passed down in many ways. So it's scary for, I think, a lot of us in the profession, certainly the older teachers, I think, older white teachers more specifically, in terms of reinvestigating and approaching work and bringing work into the space that is non-traditional, right? And being okay with not knowing. And I think that's the thing. And I think this period is calling on us to be co-creators in the teaching space with our students, and not coming from the hierarchical point of view of being the authority on the work, and being able to co-create with our students, and apply the same tenets of any sort of rigorous study, right? Even if it's just going into a culture, into a writer we're not familiar with, because, and I think sometimes the assumption is, because I'm a black man, I know everything there is about blackness, but I don't know anything about 1930 Memphis, you know, in Memphis, the same way you wouldn't know, do you know? Or even in Trinidad in the 1900s, like I don't know. But so I think if we could acknowledge that and recognize that, and not make those assumptions, we could enter that space, that world. And once we enter that world with curiosity, with interest, and with the same respect, and do the work with students to investigate that, I think it's an enriching experience for us all. So I'm really excited and really jazzed about what is happening and the conversations that are happening in the various fields that I kind of intersect, whether it's on the teaching side, or as a filmmaker, or as an actor, writer. It's really really illuminating.
Do you feel something will change? Is it a real moment of change?
I think so. I think it's incumbent on us. I think the pressure is different. It's real this time. I mean, it's always been real. I think the sustainability of it is incumbent on all of us. I think it's incumbent on all of us, and we've seen within the last few years the needle change, right? The kinds of conversations in the political landscape that we didn't dare to have a few years ago are standard practice now, whether it's Medicare for all. You know, the question of reparations is back in the conversation. And these are things that would be unheard of to even bring up. So I think there is a movement that's happening, and it seems to be, you know, time has these cyclical these blocks that seem to be 10, 15-year spans, but it feels like now we're having these seismic changes in we're having a growth spurt, so to speak, that every 5 years that there seems to be something radical, like the you know, it just makes me think of the election of Barack Obama in 2008. Seems like a whole other time.
Yeah.
That seems like 100 years ago compared to the conversation where we are now.
Yeah, and we're hearing the New York sirens, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
You don't know. Is it a police? Is it an ambulance? Someone
I mean,
dying?
someone
getting beaten up? We don't know, right?
It's frightening, Frank. I mean, I mean, New York. You've always had these sounds of these traditional stuff, but now it's helicopters overhead, sirens, whether it's the police or the ambulance. It's really like, are we living in, like, where are we living? This is supposed to be America, the land of democracy and freedom, but I think all of that is being revealed for what it has always been.
It's always been like this, but we didn't want to see, or we weren't able, specializing of people like me and others of the white population. We are in the minority anyway. More people with diverse backgrounds than ours, live in New York, but it hasn't been reflected on stage. It's been reflected in leadership. It hasn't been reflected. But how did you, as a person, how did you do? You were 3 months. You were at home. You lived with friends or family. How did you, as a human, how was that for you? What happened?
I was fortunate enough to be at home, and it was an interesting period. I mean, for me, what I did was I'm working on my screenplay. So this is a project that we're shooting this in Trinidad, and we're supposed to shoot this year in May. And obviously, once the pandemic hit, that got immediately postponed to next year. So for me, initially, I just used that time creatively to go into rewrites and to really delve into.
You could do it right away. You say, I can write now, or
I mean, for me, I was able to, because initially I thought, okay, this would not. I'm just thinking back to like early March, just before this was happening. I say, okay, I'm going to do my rewrites, not anticipating the sort of running death toll that we're experiencing in the middle of. So as I was going through it, I thought, you know what, I'm gonna use this time, this creative time, because when you're in production for a film, there's never enough time. There's always something to do. So I think, okay, I'll use this time to rework my script, work with my team to reschedule for next year. But as things started to unfold and the news started to roll out, I started to become not so much fearful for me, but I started to really think about the world in which we're in, because I am fortunate enough. I have a great apartment. I live in a great area. I'm safe. I could get Amazon to deliver my food. But then I started looking at the news and looking at the lines of people waiting to get food, people losing their jobs, and then the disproportionate amount of Black and brown people dying from this disease needlessly. At that, so that during that time, it really, that was a moment to really reflect on that. And I mean, I would classify myself as progressive. So those are some of those issues that have always been something that I've always been mindful of and feel passionately about. But then when you see it unfold in America on television the way it did, it really struck a chord, and I think as those 3 months forged on, I started to get really mindful of my own privilege, my own access, and it's funny because you are in a space that you are dealing with discrimination on so many different levels, but then I think it's also important to acknowledge where, you know, you do have access, you know, and then that makes me think a lot of some of my colleagues and some of the artists back in Trinidad that may not have some of the access and the things that that I may have, and that also gave me the thought of, okay, well, how am I bridging that gap? How am I connecting colleagues from the space where I'm from to access some of the things that are happening here? So I mean, it was really this mix of considering what is actually unfolding in the United States in here. What's my response to that, and then how do I take action in response to that? And I think my first instinct was, one is just getting realigned, just spiritually, mentally questioning and rereading and thinking about what is the kind of work that I want to do, and which for me has been just recentering the Caribbean narrative in the work that I'm inspired to tell. And then how do I now create the bridges and create the linkages with my community, you know, which I've been doing before, but I think that I think has just reemerged as a priority for me, and something that I'm interested in doing more and more. So and I thank you for the theater experience, for the series of shorts last year with the French Caribbean theater, which is such a rare thing in the city. And I think speaks again to this moment where what gets space, what gets uplifted, what gets centered in the conversation, and it was really inspiring for me to be a part of something like that, but really centered a place that I'm from, and to engage in the conversation with the New York public. Yeah. So.
And it was incredible to learn, even for us. We were not aware. It was the first time ever in, if one wants to say, the history of theater, that Caribbean plays were presented in some kind of a festival.
It's fascinating, right?
How shocking is it's unthinkable.
It's unthinkable. And to think that New York City has probably one of the largest West Indian populations outside of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Is in New York, so.
Or Paris, you know, such a big city where theater is so prominent and significant and plays such a role. So tell us a little bit, how did you come to make theater? Where did you grow up, and how was that experience?
Well, I was born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago, and my mother is from Martinique.
Okay.
Yeah, it's from Martinique, and my dad was from Jamaica. He passed away when I was really young. And
I'm sorry to hear that.
No, that's totally fine. It's a while ago. And my sister is from Barbados. So I'm really this pan-Caribbean person, I like to think of myself as. And I, growing up in Trinidad, I wasn't so much involved in the performing arts so much. I was very much into sports. I used to swim a lot, but I came to New York, and I discovered a theater at HB Studio. I initially came here. I was in fashion. I was doing some modeling and stuff in Paris and New York. And while in New York, I came across this acting studio, which I adored, and I knew that was where my life was going to go, just because it was the first time I had discovered a medium that allowed me to express something that I wanted to say. And before that, I was and I'm still very close to, there's an artist in Trinidad called Peter Minchell. He's a carnival artist, and also
what does it mean? Carnival artist means?
Carnival is the main, it's like the street parade in Trinidad, the carnival. So it's basically opera in the streets. So it's design, it's these massive costumes, music, theater, and it's all thousands and thousands of people that parade through the streets, like in Brazil or in Venice, and that sort of thing. It happens around the same time. And Trinidad is one of the largest carnivals in the world. So Peter Minshall is one of the foremost carnival artists in Trinidad, and he's been a mentor of mine for many years before becoming an actor or a filmmaker on any of those. So once I came to New York and I discovered HB, I knew New York was the place that I needed to be to pursue theater and to learn the craft. And I moved here and studied at HB, and then started working in the theater here, and then went to Yale for my graduate training in theater, which was an incredible experience in terms of the faculty and the student body. That it's a place where you're constantly creating work. And once graduating from Yale, I started a theater company that produced Caribbean theater in Trinidad. So we would go to Trinidad and would bring theater practitioners, theater directors and designers to Trinidad to work with designers and actors and stuff in Trinidad to create these classical, to reinvestigate these classical Caribbean plays. So we would do that over a couple of years. We did that. And then we'd have this theater education where we would take kids, and they would be a part of the theater training program, so they'll get to know a little bit on the inside of how theater works, and then they'll be part of our crew. So it was a really fantastic program. And then we would take these plays from the center and take them to rural parts of the country, to places that ordinarily wouldn't have access to come to Port of Spain to see a performance. So we would essentially tour the piece to rural Trinidad. So that was fascinating. And then I came after graduate school, being based in New York, really doing the New York scene. HB asked me to teach a course at HB, which was teaching international English for international students, basically. And that was a fantastic experience because I was an international student, and it was about teaching these international actors how do they bring themselves to the work, because I think that could be something that gets lost as an international person when you come to the US. And it speaks to everything that we're experiencing now. There's this sense, and you can feel this sense, that what you bring isn't enough, that I need to lose my accent, I need to have an American accent, I need to become like something else other than myself, and who I bring is not of value. So a lot of, and I felt a great affinity to that, to the international students, and still do at HB, because I related to that experience, you know, and a lot of that class was about, no, actually what you bring to the table is the very thing that makes you different and unique, although it may not appear that way in the interim, because that's not what's being reflected back at you. But in my experience, it is the very Caribbean culture and Caribbeanness and identity that I've explored that has brought me some of the most joy and met some of the most interesting and creative partnerships and people in my career. So yeah, so after that, I recently started a production company, film production company that's producing films and television. I'm currently in a lab at Big Vision Empty Wallet that's about a development lab, film lab for filmmakers. So my career has been, you know, a little bit of everything, from acting, producing, filmmaking, and teaching as well. So
it's amazing. How was the experience for you as a Black actor or a Black filmmaker in New York? We heard, I don't know if you saw that.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's New York. That's how it is, and people get a slice of it. It is the center of the coronavirus on planet Earth here in Brooklyn, and yeah. Anyway, so now the question is, I don't know if you saw the video from Griffin Matthews, where he says, my experience at ART with Diane Paulus was so horrible, and then at Second Stage. And of course, it's also about the institutions and about everybody he worked with.
Yeah.
How do you feel? How does it feel for you in New York City?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really That's a loaded question. You know, it's you know, one of the things I was talking with someone recently about is, you know, as an artist of color, you develop such an innate skill to code switch, to adapt to the room, in order to fit in order to work, you know. And for me, what I've had to reckon with myself, and one of the things that I had to really question is, I think for me, unbeknownst to myself, I think, or unbeknownst to my own, not consciously, was that how much I was really adapting who I was to accommodate an environment that may not have been, or may not have felt welcoming to who I was as a Black artist. Whether that was changing my accent, or being able to manage the fragility of a white director or institution, and taking the path of least resistance, do you know, in order to get a job, in order to pass, in order to, and it's something that I didn't really didn't grasp the full extent of it, but I think now within the last few months, just being holed up and really reevaluating what's happening, I've had to really be honest about that, and be honest about what my own prejudices were in terms of what's good theater and what's not, you know. And I think I have had to really take an honest look at that, you know. And I think that is the question for all of us. Do you know? I think you know, the question is, you know, to really hold ourselves accountable, to hold these theaters and these institutions accountable, and also hold ourselves accountable. And for me, I have had a really interesting path in that, you know, I've always felt that there's something that wasn't quite. I remember I had these reps that I was telling them about a project that I was working on that's based in the Caribbean, and they just didn't want to hear about it, and they actually was like making jokes about it, or undermining it in very subtle ways. And at the time, I didn't necessarily ascribe it to a race thing per se, but I think it's just this undercurrent or underlying sentiment of what is of value and what isn't, you know. And I think that is something inherent in all of us that comes out in subtle ways, right? And I think what we're dealing with is there's a discrimination and a marginalization that is overt, and there's and very clear, like George Floyd, and there's so much of it that's very subtle, or not as overt, and sometimes those things for me has been very difficult to parse and very difficult to pinpoint. But now there's a clarity in looking at that, and that's, I think, emboldened me and has radically changed the way I teach, and radically changed the way in which I claim space, radically changed the way in which I declare and own who I am and what I'm here to do. I think, I'm not sure it would have happened as quickly as it did without coronavirus and Black Lives Matter. So for me, it's really shaken me and had to really think back, really soberly into my past experiences, and how much I was deflecting or ignoring, not calling it for what it is, because I may not have had at that time the clarity to call it for what it was either. and in a way, it's a little heartbreaking to think back. It's like, oh, was that? Oh, is that what that was? But you know, I think it is. I remember there was a friend of mine. She was doing a play, and she was supposed to be a princess. We were doing a Greek play. We were doing Iphigenia, and she was playing Iphigenia, and she's a Black actor, brilliant actor. And the coach who was working with her was telling her, you know, I don't think you're capturing a princess enough. I don't think you don't have that princess energy. And she's like, I don't know what that means. I'm trying to be a princess. I don't know. I'm not a princess, you know, as opposed to her owning and inhabiting that character in the princess, in the way that she brings and interprets that role to be, and in her way. And I think there's so much of that sort of bias and that sort of interpretation of aesthetic and what someone's idea of what a certain role or a certain story mean or should mean, or how it should look, how it should behave, how it should sound, that's colored by our own history, our experiences, our knowledge, and at that time you know, you may not be savvy enough to call it for what it is, but I think now it's so in the open, and I think the guy who occupies the White House helps us kind of have that enemy, that target, because he's you know, he's just throwing fuel on the fire. We're able to really have that focal point that allows us to really see, you know. I remember when Trump was elected, you know, the world stopped, you know. But I also believe, you know, there are no accidents in the world. There's no accidents in the universe. And I think there's something about the confluence of all of this, with him being there, is really lasering in very, very clearly the issues that we need to tackle, you know. And I think it's a consistent thing, right? I think it's a consistent effort of re-education, unlearning, open-mindedness, love, and the ability and the willingness to be vulnerable, you know, and to trust that if we don't know, it's okay not to know. It's okay. It's okay to ask. It's okay to be real. Like in my class, I've just started opening up and just looking at it. Let's just tackle these issues about anti-Blackness and racism and white prejudice. Let's not be afraid to just say it and put it in the room and say, yes, I have anti-Black thoughts and I'm Black. I have white fragility because I'm white. Like, let's just get real. Let's just get honest with each other and not. And I think if we start there and really and get uncomfortable, as opposed to not wanting to offend because, well, that person's gonna give me a job, so I don't want to offend them. It's like you're already born in a black. You've already been blackballed. So you know, there is Byron Allen, who's this Black executive entertainment mogul, you know, entertainment studios. He's like, you know, Black people are afraid of not offending because they don't want to get blackballed. And he's like, you were born blackballed. You didn't get the memo, you know. So this fear of being marginalized, or fear you're not going to get a job if you speak out, that's already happened. That, like, you're not jeopardizing something that was never yours to begin with. So I think there's no fear, and I think there should not be any fear for those who want to see equality, justice, to speak out, to take action, and there are many practitioners and artists who've been doing that way before Black Lives Matter, right? And before all of this. So it's not like this is just happening. It's been happening. National Black Theater of Harlem, for instance, who's been at the forefront of this for a long time, and so many others. So yeah, I think it's just an unveiling of what was there for a long time.
Yeah. You said you had to deal with the fragility of white directors or fragility of white institutions. So the burden was on you even to negotiate. So tell us if you could tell a bit about that feeling you have. That
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that you're taught in many ways. I mean, I come from the Caribbean, a post-colonial space that's still reeling and dealing with its own identity issues, right? It's a predominantly Black space, East Indian, and very diverse East Indian, African, Syrian, Lebanese, Chinese, a lot of different cultures, particularly in Trinidad, but in the wider Caribbean. But we are a space that's dealing with the effects of colonialism and post-colonialism, and that's
slavery,
still, yeah, and that still lives in the DNA of I think that our community, and I think that has that's passed on, and it's passed on in many ways. That is, there's colorism in the community, there's anti-Blackness in the community, there's this sense that if you go, as we call it, if you're going foreign, if you're going to England or you come to the United States, that these are the places of milk and honey, and that the stuff that comes from the ground, from where you're from, isn't enough, cannot hold a candle to the American theater or Shakespeare. I mean, I held those views in many ways. I think it's something that's kind of in your psyche, something that you're taught, and things that are said among your friends, family, growing up in that space. So I think the journey for Black people in the diaspora is really a question of, I think in part, is knowing the history, and knowing history told by those from your community, right? Not just a general history lesson from a history book, but told from the perspective of someone from your community, that's telling the full story, or another version of the story, rather. And I think there isn't a lot of that. I mean, I think for me, one of the things that I had to also reckon with is understanding the fullness of my experience from the Caribbean, and the breadth of that, which I feel like I'm pretty well read, but then I feel like there's so much more that I haven't learned, and I'm continuing to learn, and I'm continuing to discover. And I feel like when you're reconciling with that, and then you bring those insecurities into a space in which you are now the minority, then that plays out itself in very subtle and maybe not so subtle ways, I think. And I think it's natural, it's normal, right? In the same way, like I had a friend, he's a good friend of mine, Jan. He's a German guy, and he would come to Trinidad, and we met in Trinidad, and he would tell me, like, yeah, Paul, I would go to he's in business, I would go to a conference room and have a meeting, and if he stands up and he says something, they would listen to him over the other local businessman, because he's a white man from Europe coming into the space. So there is this legacy of post-colonialism and this sense of white supremacy and that exists even within these spaces. And I think what's happening now is this unveiling, this awareness of artists of color, of white artists that are acknowledging that are recognizing that and calling it out for what it is, and now we're in that process of dismantling that and interrogating that, and I feel there's no I don't think there's any value in like the hate around that. it is what it is, right? It just is.
Mhm.
So if we just acknowledge it for what it is, because it's and we could address it in a real way and in an honest way, and then really make the steps to dismantle that and see how can we truly find equity in every space and find value in that. And if we're moving towards that, I think that's great. And the theater and the arts are always at the forefront of doing that for the most part. And I think a lot of that dismantling is there's just a lot of fear and ignorance, do you know? And I think in terms of white, some of my white colleagues, you know, I think sometimes it's just not, just never having to just have to deal with that. Do you know, just not, literally not knowing that happens to people, like literally not knowing. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about some of this police brutality thing, and then an experience that a Black colleague of ours posted on Facebook, and he was started saying, well, I don't think that's necessarily what that means. I was like, well, that's not your experience of that. And you can't speak to someone's experience of a situation. That's their experience. And I think part of the process for us, for all of us, is to listen and to hear the experiences of others and just acknowledge that. Because I think sometimes you get into a, no, that's not a race thing, or that's not what that was, but that's what they interpreted, and that's how they felt. And I think the more we're able to hear and to acknowledge what the experiences people are bringing into a room, then we have a place of conversation and departure. So for me, it's been this return in many ways to my own cultural roots, this return to this and centering that interrogation, that interest, that curiosity in centering the Caribbean experience in the narratives in which I want to tell. That I think maybe some years ago it may not have been. That is something. Well, I do Caribbean theater, but I need to get on this Hollywood train. I need to do this TV series thing, that whatever, which is great, and of course. But at the same time, it's yes, but this also needs centering. This also needs voice. This also needs a steward, and that has value. That's of service to a wider humanity, and who else is going to do it? So I think it's been a lot of that, and I think as artists of color, I feel like that's always, for me, that's been something of always navigating. How much of myself can I bring? Is there spaces? Is there a market for Caribbean movie? Do you know? And I think what I have learned, the more you step into that and you offer that with authenticity, with love, with rigor, the good stuff always rises, right? The good stuff always rises to the top, and I think I believe in that, and want to continue in that path.
So in a way, yeah, I hear you. It's hard. Even for me, and I'll think I'm honest. I do not know how it feels for you. You know, to be in the room. I do not know, and your colleagues don't know. Also, your students or white students do not know. And how does one deal with that? You know, how do one communicate experiences? And you can. It's like, you know, you have children, but you've been a child. You have seen movies about kids. You read books about kids. Your friends have kids. But when you have a child, it's different.
Yes.
If you realize it, it's, you know, as someone said, you can also have a tattoo on your face. It's the same commitment. It's something so radically different from everything you know. And the question is, how do we bridge that? Have you ever been asked to do like the Shakespeare with the British accent and in acting? And how does that make you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always wrestled with that, because you've seen, again, it's all about representation. It's all about centering and positioning. You know, when you see, you know, these great actors and they're all white and they're all speaking a certain way, you start to think, well, that's how I gotta sound, or you feel like you can see the breakdown. They want this accent or that accent, and then you feel like if I were to bring myself, would that be enough? But again, it comes back. Ultimately, this is the path of the artist, right? Is the only thing that you could bring is who you are. Ultimately, yes, okay. And as we say in Trinidad, what's for you is for you. And I think that all of that breeds this idea of fear. This idea, and I'll say this to you, Frank, that I have also been marginalized in the Black community as well, the Black American community as well. There is this Black elite, this Black bourgeois scene that I've been told, yes, he's great, but he needs to get rid of the plantains and rice and peas. This is among the Black community, right? So it's such a layered thing. It's on all and so many layers. We bring our prejudices, we bring our ideas, and vice versa. You have African and Caribbean Americans like, oh no, you're not, have a distancing from African Americans. So there is such a layered sense of racism, anti-Blackness, of white supremacy. It affects all of us in so many ways, where I feel like now, probably if I'd done that audition in my Caribbean way, that might have been the very thing that made me stand up, and the very thing that the casting director was like, that's interesting. That's not how I perceived a Mercutio being. Because I'm not gonna replace a born and bred Brooklyn American to do their thing. You know what I mean?
Or British,
or British to do what they do.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, even American actors get so upset when the Royal Shakespeare Company comes. Everybody goes crazy, say this is the real Shakespeare because they are British.
Right.
Even so to think maybe it's part of a colonial project. This Shakespeare, this is the best, and you have to try to get it. You will never be as close, but you can try. Try get a pat on the shoulder, and it says no. The theater should at least be exactly the opposite. As you said, the Prince's role, the guy who was the coach had something in his mind already. So this is not what art should be like.
Yes.
You don't do what's already there. Like Eugenio Barba, who was us yesterday.
Yes, I watched a little bit of that.
Yeah, you don't do what's already been done. You don't replicate. You don't do karaoke, and but it's so hard to really live it. And you're lucky and you're good in your field, but how hard is it for someone who maybe missed the one teacher, missed the one chance, just was at that audition, it didn't work out and didn't come in. So
I agree with you. It's really a courageous act. I think it's a courageous act for anybody to stand in themselves, stand in their own skin, and that's the great artists do that, right? The great ones really have the courage to do that, and I think that's really the task at hand now more than ever. I think now it's in many ways there is this wave of a collective push forward for us all to stand in ourselves and to be honest and vulnerable and to rep who we are. And I think that's a great thing. There's this conversation that's been happening about what is a dangerous theatrical space. Like what is a dangerous space, safe or dangerous? And in the theater, and there is this sense everything is PC, everything is sanitized. You can't say this, you can't say that, you can't do this, you can't do that. And that's been a conversation that I've been having in a lot of my classrooms. Like, what is we can have respect for each other, but until we're able to really put the thing in front of us and for all of us to dig in and to unpack it from where we come from and not worry if we're going to offend and this and that the other person, but really, if we trust each other and we trust the space could hold us, the dangerous space is a space where we can really speak freely and really interrogate and understand what happens there, stays there. But we can really work And we've been doing that recently in some of my classes and bringing in a lot of the conversation we're having right now, and people are really sharing point of views that, you know, I don't know they would have shared that in the diverse room that is those classrooms, because we're all siloed into our communities that reflect our own values and point of views. But then when we're in this theatrical space, it allows us to really get in and to really hear things that we ordinarily wouldn't. And I'm excited to get back to that. Get back to those. What is the dangerous space, and where is the space that's free of these externalized things? Let's be a non-PC, and let's investigate what that is. Let's categorize the space first to be a safe space. Let's acknowledge that. Let's consecrate that space. But then let's get dirty. Let's get messy and see what emerges from that. So that's been kind of what I've been really getting back to, which ironically was the thing that drove me to the theater to begin with. Was the thing that brought me here.
That's cool. So who inspired you? In your time as in theater making or filming, who inspires you? Who are your your mentors?
I mean, for me right now, again, that artist from Trinidad, Peter Minshall, brilliant carnival maker, theater maker. I'm also rediscovering James Baldwin and his writing. I'm kind of going all over, not just theater.
No, that's good. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a writer, an academic right now that I'm just in love with in his work. His name is Ibram X. Kendi, and he has a book that I'm reading called Stamped from the Beginning that talks about anti-racist thoughts and anti-racist and racist ideas and anti-racism and the chronicling of that over American history. And that's something I've been devouring of the last few days. You know, yeah. I mean, I've been reading a lot. So those are some of the things that I've been kind of consuming right now. I mean, I love Ivo van Hove. Like I love his work. You know, I love his mind. I love the stuff that he's creating. There's a theater artist that you know you may hear of her, and she's actually a Caribbean. She's from Barbados. Her name is Charlotte Braffett, and she is a theater maker in New York who is wildly inspiring, and her work is inspiring to me as a fellow Caribbean theater maker. Yeah, those are some of the people that are coming to mind at the moment.
Fantastic. We're coming closer to the end of the talk, and we always ask at the what do you say to young artists and or people, our listeners, in the moment, what we should focus on, and so what is the idea? I know we talked about the Royal Shakespeare Company. It's great what they're doing because that's their thing. It's authentic. But theater is a house. It has many rooms. And Hansi Sleeman said, they have that room. You have to find your own room. So just to also make that clear. But what do you think is of importance for us in general, but also for artists?
Yeah, I think it's really this question of finding your voice and really being still and really reconnecting into the thing that really moves you. And I think that's an act of courage to really find the thing that moves you most and never to forget that, and to hold on to that spark, that questioning, whether it's an idea, a concept, an experience, something that moves you to create. You know, because it is a spiritual act. It is a co-creation with the higher self. And what is that calling to create? And I think even if that thing may not seem in fashion or in vogue, I think that is the thing to keep. That's the guiding light. That's the North Star that that was going to keep you engaged, that's going to keep you grounded, that's going to fill the well when things get tough. So that's what I would say. Find that light, find that voice that's in communion with that higher self, and stay true to that.
That's important advice. And great advice, and you are living that, that you work in New York, but you keep your roots to the Caribbean, to Trinidad, and to so also now you are a model to younger artists there, because you do it, others can do it, and it's a model for what can be done. And you are part of the great diversity of New York City. New York, with all the complication, it is a great city.
Yes,
New York
it is.
has a history of complication, of riots, of depression time, and anyway, it always came back, and this city will come back, because it is a brilliant place to be, and you are part of it. You are part of the diversity, and you make it what it is, and we all have to see that clearer. And I think what is true now in these discussions, you have more agency. We all will listen better, but we learned that. I think that we really have to listen to you. So really, thank you for sharing, also being so open and honest, and we continue our series. Tomorrow we have Liva Yazzi from Syria, who is a poet, a playwright. She was at the Royal Court, and also a documentary filmmaker, to hear how does it feel for someone like her to be out of her country, being in Berlin and making theater. And she goes back and forth also with documentaries. Next week we have a wonderful, I think, also lineup. We have Kemi Elisanmi with Ebony Noel Golden, and then we have Jayton Netsirai from Kosovo. The National Theatre of Kosovo has been destroyed by real estate people, a very significant place, and he's talking with Gianna Karabonari from Romania about that, and Iman Ashtar from Palestine will talk about her work, her theater, and from Jamaica we will have Sakina Dia and Ebony Walters to talk about their work in Jamaica. So we are continuing our travels around the world. And again, thank you for being with us, taking your time. Thanks for our listeners. It is important that we hear them. It's important for Paul to know that people are listening to him, and what he has to say it is really important for us. And what he says is of significance. It's about us. We have to make an authentic change and go with it. What we hear from all the talks is that theater, we put it out there, but what's important is the audience to come, to be there, and that the audience actually creates the sense and makes connections. And that's also what theater is about, that the reading of the literature, the reading of the plays, the connections we make, the actions we take because of it is of significance. Thanks to HowlRound for hosting us, Vijay, Thea, who gets up every morning at 9 o'clock, before 9 in Los Angeles. And I'm not sure if HowlRound thought we would do it so long. So really great support they give us. And of course, the Segal team, Andy and Sun Yang. So thank you. And Paul, good luck. And I know
thank you so much. This has been great. Thank you so much for this. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, and all the best. And we can't wait to see your film and to see your theater work. And again, thanks for helping us out when you came to direct at the Segal. It was a great.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye, Paul.